Good evening and welcome to the Fort Smith City Board of Directors study session, February 25th, 2025. Keep in mind our meetings are being televised live for the benefit of residents who cannot attend with us in person. And with that, we will go right to the first item on the agenda. Mr. Dingman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mayor. The first item on this evening's agenda is a presentation regarding the City of Fort Smith sports tourism. Ashley Backert, the Executive Director of the Convention and Visitors Bureau, is here to present this item.
Welcome. Welcome, Ashley.
Thank you. So good evening, Mayor, City Directors, City Administration, and residents, both here and online. I want to thank you guys for taking the time to listen to what the AMP feels is the next step in tourism and for our community. We recognize that you have many priorities and hope that tonight's presentation will not only be a positive light during tough times, but it's also seen as a piece of the solution puzzle. Early last year, the AMP tasked me with finding a pathway forward for the indoor sports facility study that was presented to you all in 2022. Part of that pathway needed to include our sports tourism strategy, which you'll hear more about shortly. My priority, though, was not just getting a facility built, but how we create a strong foundation on which to build so that when it is built, we are competing at the highest level. That led me to connect with Huddle Up Group, who I've had the opportunity to work with in both Jacksonville and Durham, North Carolina, and Tulsa, Oklahoma, all with positive, workable plans that created major impacts for those communities. As a former athlete, I enjoy and thrive on a solid playbook, and that is exactly what they have provided. I will not steal their thunder, although it's hard sometimes, but will say that what you will hear today will create positive opportunities for our community, whether that be providing a space for our residents to participate in sports of all ages, having a positive economic impact on the city's budget, or opening doors in the economic development world. Projects and plans such as this have the chance to create lasting impacts on the community. This has been proven in numerous cities worldwide, which is why so many more are choosing to invest in these opportunities. Before I turn this over to John and his team, I'd like to poll the whole entire audience and the directors themselves. How many of you know someone who travels for sports, either at a youth or adult level? This can include road races, fishing tournaments, traditional tournaments, cheer and dance, or any of the above. Please raise your hand. Thank you. Every time that person and their group, whether it be their family or their friends, travel to participate in an event, they're giving that community their money and allowing that community to thrive and grow. Keep that in mind as you listen to the team and think about why we can't be the ones to capture other groups' money and use it to help us thrive and grow, while also keeping those you know and their money right here in Fort Smith. With that, I want to introduce John Schmieder, President and founder of Huddle Up Group.
Welcome.
Thank you, Ashley. Thanks for having us tonight. Myself, Vince Trinidad on our team from Tulsa. I'm from Phoenix. I'm going to go take a 45-minute presentation and do it in about 8 minutes. All right. So I want Jason to get as much time for Synergy Sports because he's got some of the real meat and potatoes behind this whole project. So we're sports tourism consultants. We've been in business about 12 and a half years. We've done hundreds of projects similar to this. As Ashley mentioned, we worked with her in her prior 3 destinations. I also ran the sports commissions in Tulsa, Denver, and Phoenix, where I live now. So I've sat in her chair and marketed in this space against the key competition that's out there. About 8 years ago, if you like data and benchmarking, you're going to love us because that's what we're all about. So about 8 years ago, there wasn't a tool in the sports tourism industry as we were growing and booming and all these Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities were coming into our marketplace. There wasn't really a measurement tool or a scorecard in our industry to say who are we competing against or who does Fort Smith look like, right? So we went out and created it. One existed on the meetings and convention side that would be more for your convention center folks to talk about, but there wasn't one for sports. So we built it, and we built it, it's called the Sports Tourism Index. I'm going to show you your data here in a moment. We built it off of feedback from over 100 event owners, from USA BMX to all the Olympic governing bodies, the NCAA, the entire alphabet soup of our industry. And we asked them, if you're going to put an event, one of your cherished championships, if you're going to put it in Fort Smith, or you're going to put it in North Little Rock, or you're going to put it in Tulsa or Norman, or any other destination of the 500 plus that are in this space today in America, why are you making those choices? And their answers really fell into the 4 buckets, we call them, across the bottom. Facilities are king. You're going to hear about that today. The destination itself, can we get there by planes, trains, automobiles? Is it accessible? Does it have the right hotel infrastructure, restaurants, attractions? So if we win the 8 o'clock game and we don't play till 4, is there something for our families to go do? And then third, the organization, so Ashley's group. Do they have the ability, as we like to say, to put on backpacks and help us with volunteers and marketing and social media and referee hospitality, transportation, those types of things? And then lastly, what's the event history of that destination and that organization? Have they done an event that looks like us, right? And so those 4 buckets, every answer, thank you, Ashley, for going through this again for Fort Smith. There are 1,900 different data points on the back end of the Sports Tourism Index. There's nowhere in there for you to say, hey, my market is awesome, so we should get some bonus points. Every question that's asked has a point value attributed to the answer, right? So we're literally using data to drive us towards a SWOT analysis, which you'll see in the report when you get it. It's about 40 pages long. So here's your data. And you can see down the left for Fort Smith, down the left are the 4 buckets in the total. So facilities, the ones I just talked about, destination strength, organizational structure, and events. Destination strength we usually can't really impact through a strategic planning process like this, but the other 3 we can, and they're all related. So when we get into the facility piece on the back end of the presentation tonight, if we build facilities that will drive more tourism, we'll have more events, more economic impact, more hotel stays, which is really what they're measured on at the CVB. Also, you can't lose track of this. Anything we invest in, our kids get a better place to play too. Right? And you do have some clubs in the area that are lacking capacity to grow because they don't have the right facility inventory in the market. So you can see it's not, my folks were educators when I was a younger guy. It's not meant to be 90s an A, 80s a B, 70s a C. Literally the highest score we've ever seen is 76, and that's a world-renowned sports commission in the beaches of Florida that has a $15 million sports budget. That's not what we're talking about here. Right. So the good thing is the strategic plan, the playbook Ashley mentioned that we put in place, and again, you can access it through asking her for a copy of it if you don't already have it. All these, 3 of these 4 buckets we can really positively impact, and some of that work is already being done today. So very quickly, if you read the 40-page document, the real meat and potatoes are about page 15. There are 2 sets of recommendations. The first set are organizational things that we can do today. And obviously, I noted here that 2 of them, Ashley's team has already moved forward on. They've hired a sports director for the first time, so that's human capital, building relationship bridges with all the people in this room and the community. There's about 4 or 5 pages on best practices how to do that. And then marketing, new website, some of those types of things, how we're going out into the marketplace, because sports tourism is relatively new to this particular organization. So those things are already happening. The secondary ones, which are the rest of our presentation tonight, are really longer term because it takes time to put in funding mechanisms. It takes time to get a site acquired. It takes time to build if you're building something new. So our recommendations that are in the playbook all have an economic impact analysis to it, and Jason's going to get into some of that. But the big one, the big lacking facility in this region is indoor hardwood court surfaces. So 8 courts, basketball, 16 volleyball, futsal, pickleball. USA Pickleball is a client of ours. They're based in Phoenix, where I live. So we did a whole analysis, you'll see in a moment, on an indoor facility that is really the feature of tonight. And then enhancing the existing venues at Creekmore. They were under construction at the pool when we were here in October. Ben Guerin, the Diamonds were under construction at the time as well. All those are going to be very good additions to your toolkit, if you will, things that Ashley's team can go out and sell. And then lastly, there isn't a regional facility master plan in place, and we find that all over the country. It's pretty rare. But we suggest that if you had the ability to get, say, Parks and Rec, all the school districts, the clubs and all those to like put their poker chips in the middle of the table on what they'd really like to see happen on a facility effort. If we get all those, all those poker chips pushed in the middle, we won't have to, come across a time when we're doing something redundant, right? We don't want to do that. And we have several great stories I could tell you if we had more time about some destinations we worked with that did build redundant facilities and kind of how far 2 steps forward, 3 steps back type of thing that happened to them. So we also overlay, again, we're very benchmark driven, so we also overlay any of the concepts that the index data is telling us with participation data. So if you look here, so when we were getting closer to, hey, an indoor facility that we can use all year round for both local and for hosting tournaments on the weekends, local use and tournament weekends, do those sport types emanate or resonate in this region, right? So if you look at the MPI on the right, the data, if you're at 100, it's a different indexing tool, but if you're at 100, that's average for the whole United States. So as you can see in volleyball, all of your index data in the drive markets are all higher than 100. That means there are audiences that fit what we're talking about, right? And in basketball, it could be the opposite is true, whereas locally, those audiences aren't here. But as you get further out in concentric circles, the audience grows bigger. And that's not a surprise because there aren't that many facilities of this type in this region of the country. So then when we ask facility or event owners about what types of facilities they want to buy, if you will, and put their events in it, we only listed 4 here. We have about 10 or 12 on this chart normally. But we listed these 4 because you have venues of these types, for these sport types. My son's going to be a pretty good baseball player, I think. He's getting ready to get into travel ball. So if you look across there, when we ask these event owners, I'll use Diamonds as my example. When we ask Cal Ripken and his people where you want to put tournaments, what type of facility do you want, right? And you can see tournament friendly is defined as being a facility that can do a lot of the local, state level, maybe a regional type event. But if you're going to do a big national championship, you're probably going to have to cobble together multiple venues because there aren't enough fields in one place. What the Cal Ripkens of the world want is an anchor facility, meaning they can host their entire championship in one parking lot, one place for referee hospitality, one sets of fields, and they don't have to manage multiple sites, right? And then we compared on the right what your top scoring on the index, what your top scoring facility is as it relates to these 4 main items. And then lastly, on top of that, so we're going down our example of indoor. Again, the whole study that we did talks about this. When we go on indoor, on our Sports Tourism Index platform, we have about 700 indoor facilities that have been scored. The top 10, 1 through 10, so those of you that raised your hands, we're talking about Disney Sports, we're talking about Grand Park in Hamilton County, Indiana, we're talking about places like that. The top indoor facilities have these attributes on top of just the hard court count. So the ADA compliant, do they have permanent Wi-Fi, parking, and oh, by the way, can Ashley's team book the facility? Because if they can't book it and have calendar control, this is a tourism exercise. You can build the nicest thing in the world. If they can't book it, it doesn't meet the needs of what we've been hired to do. And then the overall column are like basically a C-level student. The top 10 is A++ honor student. The middle is middle of the bell curve. So if you want to be average, go build that, which we would never suggest. So we're going to target like right in between these two with what we proposed on an 8-court facility. And on the right, the darker the green in the difference column, the bigger the gap between being an honor student and being a C student, if that makes any sense. So you can see where the gaps are on number of courts, locker rooms, having those, and the whole plan Jason's about to talk to you about address all of these attributes. So any project we do, we put in the scope of work that once we suggest a certain type of asset on the facility side, we do an economic impact study around that asset. So these would be all new tournaments that because you don't have this type of facility, Ashley's team would be able to go get and drive overnight stays. And so I'm not going to read the data to you, but fundamentally 11 new tournaments that you're not hosting right now. And we don't want to compete with the convention center and do those types of things either. So these would be all brand new business for all the hotels in your area that you serve, right? With that, I'm going to turn the mic over to Jason, our friends from Synergy Sports.
Thanks, John. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for having us down. I'm Jason Boudry. I own Synergy Sports. I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina. And so Huddle Up Group and Synergy partner on a dozen or so projects around the country. We have about 30 or 35 that are in development right now. And so there's no pun intended, synergy between our company and John's is where they look at things holistically and from an overarching point of view, we get more into the granular look at things. So when Huddle Up Group proposes, your destination would be successful with an indoor facility, that begs the question, well, what does that facility look like? How many courts does it have? Does it have conference rooms? Does it have meeting spaces? Does it have childcare? Does it have locker rooms? Does it have whatever? How much does that facility cost? What does it look like? How tall are the ceilings? Where is it going to go? And then most importantly, how does it operate? Right? And so that's what I created Synergy to do. And so we are a facility consulting firm, whereas Huddle Up Group is more of a destination consulting firm. And so we primarily work with municipalities. Like I said, we've got 30 or so projects around the country. And so our main focus is on the nuts and bolts, the blocking and tackling of taking a Huddle Up assessment and turning that into an actionable plan. And so as we worked through this process with Ashley and her team, right, we wanted to answer all those questions. So what could it look like? Where could it go? How could it operate? And up until a couple of years ago, as I've presented and come up with these different plans from our team, you know, we would speak and present in front of city councils and county commissions all over the place, and we would give them great renderings and pictures and financial data and economic impact, and we'd tell them, hey, you know, this is going to cost $40 million. This is going to cost $80 million, whatever the number was. And usually that's where the conversation ended, right? Because everybody would say, you know, your economic numbers are great, the pictures look amazing, we would love to have a couple 100,000 people come to our city, but we don't have $40 million. We don't have $80 million. And so over the past few years, we've developed a funding mechanism whereby we're able to structure public-private partnerships for municipalities where a facility, whether it's diamond, flat fields, indoor, aquatics, ice hockey, whatever it is, where that makes sense, then we can also assist on the funding side. And so as it was proposed in the Huddle Up assessment, the ideal type of facility is going to be an 8 to 10 court indoor facility. These are stock images that we've developed for other projects just to show, you know, some of what this could look like, also some differences in A versus B. We are very early in this process. While we've made a lot of progress, we don't know exactly how everything's going to lay out at this point. We know what the data says the Fort Smith region needs. We don't necessarily know what that looks like or whether the door swings left or right on any particular door. But this shows you on the right a 10-court facility, on the left. On the right is an 8-court facility. They have different amenities. And so as we work through this process, we'll start to fine-tune that a little bit more. Some images of conceptual renderings. So while these facilities are typically big metal buildings, they can be very nice big metal buildings, right? These are typically 40 to 50 foot high ceilings, but there can be glass, there can be different facades, there can be different architectural features. So we want these facilities to blend in, to be upscale, to be presentable, not just a big metal barn, you know, sitting out somewhere. And so as we went through our process, we looked at multiple areas of viable space, right? And so we listed, and we have kind of in our back pocket, 5 or 6 viable locations for an indoor sports facility. This happens to be one of those sites. Again, being very early in this process, and Ashley can speak more to kind of the nuance of the site and some of the back conversations that have been happening. But we do this stuff all day long, and so we felt for your benefit, it's easier to grasp what this could look like on a particular site in terms of the size of the facility, some of the other complementary development that can go with it. And so you can see here, right, number one is the actual sports facility. You've got a drop-off area, you've got some areas for potential retail, potential additional hotel. So as John spoke about and as we'll talk about, these facilities definitely generate economic impact, they generate revenue, they generate spending, but they also generate additional development, right, that sometimes gets overlooked. Whether it's on a particular site where a hotel wants to be or retail, or it's just supporting local businesses, right? A coffee shop opens up another location, or a local deli, right, hires more people. That's economic impact too, and we don't want to forget about that, right? And as these facilities get developed, John made a great point that Monday through Thursday, this is a quality of life amenity. This is a recreation amenity for local residents, right? So this isn't an elitist kind of facility that is, you know, pay for use all the time. So this is a place for summer camps. It's a place for after-school programs. It's a place to go walk around a fitness track when it's hot out. It's a place to go play pickleball in the morning. And those are all community amenities, right? Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and in the evenings, yeah, it becomes a rental facility because it has to pay for itself. But by that same token, you know, we want to do good things for good communities and for their residents. So, like I said, you know, we put this on this particular site it can go on a handful of other sites. And so again, as we work through this process, we'll start to hone in on that a little bit. We've done a good bit of work on getting a fairly accurate construction estimate, right? We didn't just throw a number at a building and say that's what it's going to cost. So we've reached out to some local professionals on the construction side, the architecture and engineering side, to get an idea of where we sit with the viability and the affordability and the cost of a project like what we're talking about. I'm not going to go through every number. I don't expect you to look at every number. Really, this is to illustrate the financial modeling that we do on these facilities. And so, if we want to focus on one thing, it's the bottom line number. And so as we modeled this out, right, is this financial model 100% right? No. Is it pretty close? Yes. And so what this shows is there are, and this is typical with a lot of these facilities, early year subsidies that are required, but over the course of a 10-year period, this is going to make about $1.2 million a year, right? And so this gets into, segueing into the funding piece of this. And so the way that we structure these projects, we only recommend a public-private partnership where there is kind of a light at the end of the tunnel, or there is such economic impact that cities and counties are willing to take an annual hit in order to get that economic impact. And so in this case, right, we see a light at the end of the tunnel after the second year. Net income improves, cash flow improves, so that it generates both positive cash flow and profitability starting in year 3. And so the concept of a public-private partnership is one where the municipality brings to the table certain assets. The private side also brings certain assets, right? So, as we sit here tonight, the municipality has land, they have some economic development tools. The private side has capital. The private side has development expertise. The private side has operational expertise. And so when you bring those two things together, the structure that this is most alike to is that of a lease, right? And so the private side can bring the capital, they can build the building, and in essence, lease it back to the municipality for a single year lease expense that is subject to annual appropriations, and it has 29 renewals attached to it. So what this doesn't do, it doesn't require the city to issue bonds. It doesn't raise anyone's taxes in the city. This becomes a self-funded, self-supporting sports asset that delivers the profit back to the city, right? And so the city becomes the owner of the asset, just like you would if you mortgage your house or lease a car. And there's ways that we've built over the years to mitigate and minimize any potential risk that the city has for those short-term subsidies getting bigger or going too long, right? One of them is A&P. And so there is A&P revenue that gets generated through these additional hotel taxes that can be used to support that subsidy. There's also reserve accounts that we build into these projects of several $1 million that generally comes from naming rights, advertising sponsorships, that are also used to shore up any short-term subsidy requirements for the sports facility. And so, again, I'm not going to read through all these. I essentially explained all of that. And so I'll kind of turn it over to myself, John, Vince. We've got David here on the construction side, and certainly Ashley. I know you guys have a lot to get through tonight, but we're happy to answer any initial questions. Okay.
Okay, thank you. At this time, we will go to Director Rigo. You recognize.
Thank you, Mayor. Ashley, I think if and I've got some other comments, but I would like, if you wouldn't mind, to take a little bit of time for folks watching who might not be aware of, what the A&P Commission's purpose is and what sort of the responsibility is, and the fact that, we're here tonight because the A&P decided to fund a, study into this, to move this project off center. And so, what is the purpose of the A&P Commission in our community, in the CVB?
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, I want residents to understand you guys don't pay our bills. You don't pay for our services. It strictly comes from the visitors. So unless you have family members, which I can totally understand during the holidays, you don't want them with you. If they're staying in the hotels, then their 3% occupancy tax that they pay on their bill does come to support our efforts. But otherwise, it's 100% paid for by the visitor. So when we look at things like this, we are driven and tasked with bringing visitation in. And we do that through meetings and conventions. We do that through sports. We do that through leisure travel. We handle a lot of the marketing outbound, so you likely will not see our work because we are focused on other markets. But the other side of this is, and this is really my goal, is that we align the community and the values of the community with that visitor experience as well. So we want to make sure that whatever we do, that the residents resonate with it, believe it, so that way when the visitor comes in, they aren't getting tricked or duped. It's the same experience that we've been marketing to them is what they're also getting from the resident.
And thank you for that clarity or clarification. So for the Huddle Up and Synergy Group, you'd mentioned sort of a dozen projects that you have complete around the country and a few dozen other ones in progress. Can you speak to us a little bit, and I'm really not going for a pun, but sort of the batting average you have with your existing projects as far as the financial modelings and, what it's been looking like for your investors versus, the private side versus the public side? Are you guys hitting the targets you're putting out there as far as the subsidies that you're looking for from public partners in those early years? Expound on that a little.
Yeah, no, thanks for that question. That's a great question. So we did an analysis, I think, in the past 6 months on our currently operating facilities, which we have assigned to different operators that we partner with, what their pro forma showed prior to construction and what their actual operating revenues were. And what we found in looking at a dozen or so facilities was that we were within about 10%, right? And that included COVID years, which you can throw a hand grenade into most everything during COVID. And so, again, if we're 10% wrong on those numbers, you're making $1 million instead of $1.2 million. So we have a lot of confidence because we have these facilities being operated all around the country, and we have the relationships with the USA fill in the blank, USA volleyball,
Sure.
USA softball.
Is it accurate to say, or would it be accurate to characterize, because you are partnering with and identifying, per project, tens of millions of dollars of private sector financing, depending on, or to each project, that you're very serious and conservative and realistic in your projections, because otherwise you would not, your entire business model would fail catastrophically if you were not serious with your numbers.
We have to be, right? We have to be more accurate than any other consulting firm out there. We have to be more conservative for that very purpose, right? Because if we tell you you're going to make $1 million and you lose $1 million, that'll be the last project we get funding for. And so there's certainly other groups out there that do some of this stuff, but we have a vested interest in the communities we choose to work with for that reason, right? Because we're going to be here long term. We're not just going to give you a report and go on our way. We're part of this project. We're here from now until it gets built and while it's operating, long term, right? So we have to be a lot more right.
Sure. And so your best experience and education and knowledge is telling you that we are a location you want to partner with that will be beneficial to you. It does you no good whatsoever for your bottom line or your reputation to make a poor selection when it comes to Fort Smith. Is that fair to say?
100%.
Okay. And Mayor, I have one last thing, if I may. I know that you're seeking from the board, and maybe this is more of a question for Ashley, the permission, if you will, and forgive my voice, sorry, I'm still getting over the flu. You're seeking sort of permission structure from this board to investigate a memorandum of understanding or agreement, with the Huddle Up and the Synergy groups. And so is it possible, given that, there's options, when you look at these projected $286,000 shortfall and $117,000 shortfall the first year and the second year, would it be possible to structure an MOU around, ensuring that the A&P funding, would cover most or all of that shortfall if it were to occur, and also to structure it so that those naming rights agreements and things like that were mentioned go to it? I guess what I'm getting at is, could you structure a MOU where you explicitly say that, general funds are not to be the first, second, third, fourth option? It's way down the list. I mean, there's a lot of, is there flexibility you can have in how a agreement is structured?
Yes.
The agreement.
Yes. So typically, I mean, part of this next phase or this next step will be working with individual directors or city staff to better understand exactly what those parameters are and to craft that MOU or MOA to specifically address whatever those concerns are and whatever direction y'all direct us to go.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for traveling from far and wide today, and thanks for your interest in our community.
Thank you.
Director Good.
Thank you, Mayor. Hey, John. Nice presentation, actually. Thank you. I've got a question for, is it John?
Yeah.
Actually, I called you out because you're the only name that I have written down. I'm sorry.
That's all right. That's all right.
So I've got a question about, kind of like what Vice Mayor asked you about some of your other facilities and projects. And my question is, the scope of this seems small to me. In other areas, my question is this really sustainable? After 10 years of the lease agreement, how likely is it that this may continue to prosper? And I'll ask you, one of the reasons I ask you that, because I'm looking at the 75% A&P tax redirect. I notice that is level, but the operating income is going down as well. So the redirect stays the same.
Yeah, so as a percentage, it goes down, right? And so what that shows is it can be less supporting. It requires less support from A&P revenue, right? So these facilities can all support their own operating expenses, right? They can pay the light bills, they can pay the operations. Yeah. Where it needs help, right, in those early years is paying essentially the debt service. And so in the early years, you lean more on A&P revenue, you lean more on the naming rights capital that you accumulate during the development period.
Yeah.
And so as that isn't required as much, then the 75% A&P redirect is 75% in year one, and you could probably be renamed a little bit better, because as it goes down into years 7, 8, 9, 10, as a percentage of total A&P revenue, A&P gets to keep more of that revenue, if that makes sense. And so that's used, and you guys may not be as familiar with it as Ashley, but A&P to bring these big tournaments in requires, they like to call them grants, but these organizers require fees be paid, right, to bring in a basketball tournament, right? It helps with their expenses. So the more money that an A&P has in their cash reserves, the bigger the tournament, the more prestigious tournament that they're able to bring in.
Okay.
You asked earlier, is this sustainable?
Yes.
Right? Is it too small? Right? This kind of goes back to what the Vice Mayor said. It's not my opinion what you guys should build. Right? It's not John's opinion. It's what the data says you need to build if you want to be successful.
Okay, good.
Right? You already have a diamond facility. Right? You already have some of these other assets. They're not all within the same parking lot, but you already have them. And so it doesn't do really anybody any good if 8 courts is good, then 16 has to be better. because you're going to have 12 of them sitting vacant most of the time, right? And so the data says this is going to be successful. And from John's assessment of several hundred rights holders, they're looking for something 8 courts or more. That's not really going to change, right?
Okay.
That was decided years ago, and it hasn't changed in years. So as we see this long term, this is the right size project for the right size market for the right size community.
Excellent answer. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
And let me retract on what I said about it being too small. And the reason I said that is because I had in my mind before, we've talked about this, multiple times since I've been on the board about doing an indoor sports complex and what that might look like. And, some of the ideas we had incorporated outdoor facility as well. Of course, it was just huge and was beyond the, scope of what we knew we could pay for. But anyway, so that's why I said I don't think it's too small. But like you said, if the data shows that this is what's needed and will be sustainable with the data that you've accumulated with the use of the facility, I'm all for it. I'll tell you that I'm supportive of it. But I'll tell you because I've been involved in travel sports since my son was little. And I've got nieces, and I've got nephews, and friends of family, and people in the community that, matter of fact, went to volleyball competitions here, cheerleading competitions across the United States. So I know they do well. So I appreciate the information. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.
I do want to chime in really quick because I know that it's hard to believe that a facility can be long-lasting over 10 years or plus. But think about the places that you choose to vacation annually, year after year after year, because you had a great experience, because everything was going well. Travel parents, I coach a softball team, we choose to go to the same tournaments every single year because they have the right competition, they have a great package together, and these are events that have been around for 40 plus years that continue to drive that traffic. Sports is different than a lot of other markets. Sports will drive, people will give up things to invest in. Little Johnny, my own personal experience of traveling to go run a marathon because that's a part of my bucket list. Yeah. I will defer my own individual spending to make sure that those things happen and they are successful in facilities that do it right, and they will get repeat for the long haul.
Good job. Thanks, Ashley.
Director Martin, Neil Martin.
Ashley, I would like to have this presentation.
Absolutely.
I don't think we got that right.
Yeah, we actually tested it this morning, and
Okay.
it's now in with Sherry, so
Okay.
you guys will get it.
All right. So yeah, I'd like to see that. I know the economic impact is something that I'd like to look at a little further. Provide a little more guidance. I don't know if that's you or the guys here. Provide a little more guidance about the dollars that go into building the facility, not the dollars that the city is putting up or the A&P would put up, but the building of the facility. Where do those dollars come from?
Jason again.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So again, going back to the structure of this public-private partnership, in a nutshell, the private side is able to provide, we say 107%, but there's what's called a pre-construction budget, and then there's a construction budget, right? And in that is the actual cost to build the facility, but then also in that is professional services, architecture, engineering, legal, zoning, planning, permitting, that sort of thing. And so the private side can come with all of those funds. And so part of this next period, so, should you guys direct us that way, is to come back with all of those details of exactly what that number is, how much is, X, Y, and Z. And if, just for round numbers, if we come back with $33 million, then the funding that the private side is able to bring will be deployed as it's needed, just like if you build a house or whatnot. If we're getting into too many details here, stop me. But we have a construction management partner.
Well, maybe where I'm going is who is the private side?
So we have a number, 5 or 6 different funding partners. And so it depends on the project, it depends on where in the country, it depends on, a number of things. It's a mix of true private equity, it's a mix of low cost, low interest debt, it's a mix of the private side selling tax exempt bonds in order to, accumulate whatever funding is needed for that particular project. And so, go ahead.
So it's not like a,
It's not like a true private equity firm that has
Okay, right.
X, we have $100 million to deploy somewhere.
right,
Right, and so that's one of the beauties of this is we've got access to nearly unlimited capital because of the way that we're able to stack private equity, low-cost debt, bonds on the private side in order to come up with the $33 million.
do they work on water and sewer as well?
They do. Anything for public good.
Okay,
So,
I think we need to have a different conversation. Our next study session, here we go.
absolutely. I'm not stepping into that one, but give me a call later.
Well, so it's not an entity.
It is not an entity,
Okay.
right, that has like you would think of traditional private equity.
Right.
And part of the reason for that, for any of you in finance or banking, is the traditional private equity model requires, 15, 18, 20% rates of return or internal rates of return or interest rate. And so by stacking this different kinds of capital, we're able to keep that debt interest rate between 5 and 6%, right? So it's going to rival a bond rate,
Okay.
but it has infinitely more benefits than bonding that we can talk about. But that's one of the biggest benefits of the public-private partnership component is you're not using up any of your bond capacity because you have other things that you want to use those bond funds for.
So who makes money on this deal?
So
Like,
different,
somebody
Yeah.
has to, you guys will make money.
Yep.
The city will make money if, in terms of.
Right.
tax. But.
So
is there-
the
if-
people that are involved, right? So Synergy, our partners, we're part of the professional services. And if you're familiar with construction at all or commercial development, there's a construction manager, or there's a developer involved. And there's a developer fee that's part of every development project, right? For the developer to manage the project, to coordinate and organize everybody. So that's how the developer or the construction manager makes money. Obviously, the construction companies and the electricians, they all make their money. Our funding partners make their money on that low-cost interest, right? We've got partners that are nonprofits, so by definition, they really don't have to make a ton of money as long as they cover their overhead and their expenses. And from the private side, the only other piece of that is the operator. And so the operator is a contracted operator that appears in the operating budget as a fee-based operator, right? Because we don't have to go into it now, but in a private facility, that operator is more incentivized to charge everybody money, right? And they're disincentivized to let you and your kid come in and shoot a basketball.
Right.
So as a leased asset to the city stays in control of this entire project, right? Even into operations. It's your car, right, that you're leasing. If you choose to drive for Uber and Lyft and make some money, great. Your lease payment is that much less, right? But at the end of the day, you could say, hey, you know what? We don't want to host any tournaments. We only want to use this for the community. That's fine. You still have your lease payment.
Okay.
And so the operator gets paid just a contracted rate. And so they show up in the operating budget. After that, whatever profits are left over, everybody else has made their money. And so this is like your Lyft or Uber profit. This goes back to the city, right? And we've got some things that we typically recommend. We recommend a nonprofit get set up, kind of like a sports foundation, so that the sports complex can receive tax-deductible donations from corporations and that sort of thing. And it keeps it in its own silo. So it can be used to reinvest into sports and into the youth community.
Okay.
But we can talk about that later.
Okay. I'm sure some of these have failed.
Yep.
How does that happen?
So none of these have failed once they've been built.
So when you say none of these, what are these
none of
the ones that you guys have been involved in? And
Any of
partnered with?
ours, independent of the ones that we've partnered on, have failed once we've gone into this pre-construction of this MOU, and once the city or the county has made the commitment to move forward on it. None of those have failed. Sometimes our feasibility studies will come back, and we've had this happen, a good number of times. It'll come back and it'll show that a project's going to lose $3 million a year, and it's never going to be profitable. And we're going to recommend don't build the project. And most cities won't do that project. If this same model showed you're going to lose $200,000 every year, and you're never going to make money, that's a little bit more of a gray area, because you guys may weigh the economic impact and the $200,000, and you may not make money, but you may still choose to move forward because the economic impact outweighs the subsidy that you're going to get.
Well, in this scenario, after year 2, it's making money.
Correct.
How does this succeed? What's the model for? I mean, once it's up and running, how does it succeed? How does it do well?
So it succeeds through a partnership, again, with CVB and the private side. So we've got our operators have their circles that they run in, and they know certain organizers. Ashley and her team has other events, other sports, and so it's the coming together of both of those sides that makes it successful, while still allocating a portion of time for the community, right? 11 a.m., come in and play pickleball, walk around a track. And so there's this balance between public use and revenue generation so that the model always balances. If that model gets off one way or the other, somebody's going to be upset.
But a majority of that success depends on tournaments happening. And how does OVG fit into this? I don't know if we ever talked about that when I met with you, Ashley. Does OVG fit in with some? I know they're a different world. They operate in a different world, but.
Yeah, I mean, OVG, just what Jason said, they can or they don't have to at all. I mean, OVG is really meant to be in the convention center and the music center space, and this is not necessarily in their wheelhouse. This is not in an ASM, which is their OVG's rival and competitor. It's not in their wheelhouse either. So I think this is working with, and you guys have a handful of partners from across the nation that really only operate in this sports space, and that's what helps leverage, hey, we've got Memphis that has this tournament, we're going to put them on a rotation because we're working with the same one, and then we get them in year 2 and things like that. Like, that's the partnership that I will tell you. I see it most successful in sports. It is not that successful in meetings and conventions because everyone's kind of out for their own blood, and for whatever reason, sports just tends to work better.
Okay. I am interested in hearing from Director Settle. He's the one that's actively involved in travel right now, definitely. And so I've heard his thoughts from time to time. So I'd be interested in hear what he has to say whenever it's his time. Thank you for
Okay, thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Director Rigo, and then Director Christina Kasavage, and then we'll hear from Director Settle.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out a couple things real quick. This is a topic that's come up, as Director Good alluded to, numerous times over the years, different flavors, different studies, different groups involved. And I think the thing that really differentiates the Huddle Up group and the Synergy group is that they actually came here and spent a number of days here in Fort Smith, traveled from afar in the country, came, talked to the people who operate club teams and rec teams and all the different multifaceted nature of our youth and adult and recreational sports programs. And so, that's what sort of really, I think, differentiated this study from, efforts that have been less productive in the past. It was talked about the process that goes on. I wanted to illustrate a little bit for folks the process in the A&P Commission when it comes to, the A&P Commission is made up of 2 members of the board of directors, myself and Director Christina Katsavis, and then folks from the hotel and restaurant industries. And so that, what you see on the screen, the 3% tax that comes in off of hotel room usage, that's the money that we meet on a monthly basis and decide in our meetings, you know, the proposals that come forward. Hey, you know, so-and-so group wants to bring a fishing tournament here. You know, is there any kind of partnership that can go on from A&P funds? And so we're regularly assessing opportunities that are brought to us by Ashley and her professional sales team to attract events to the community, and it's been very successful. And I think the thing to keep in mind when you talk about this team that's in front of us, again, compared to others, is Huddle Up and Synergy, the connections that they have with national sports organizations and people who put on and host tournaments is very, very important, because, again, their entire model is predicated, is built upon, it's essential that they succeed in what they're doing. If they secure private sector funding to the tune of tens of millions of dollars to build something, and then it just sits there empty and doesn't function, that does them no good reputationally. It does not allow them to successfully build in another area, because then there is a bad taste left from that. And so it is incumbent, and it behooves them to make sure that tournament operators across the country know, hey, here's a new venue that's open right in the center of the country, you know, confluence of interstates, accessible by air, et cetera, and then they give and present and make sure Ashley and her professional team, whose entire job is to sell and market our community, have opportunities to speak with these folks that organize these tournaments. And so it's a 24/7 job that goes into selling and marketing the community for events like this. And Ashley and her team at the CVB are subject matter experts and are very good at their job, and so are the Huddle Up and Synergy folks. And so this, I think, is one of those rare opportunities where so many things are aligning for people who want success to occur. I just find it very encouraging. I appreciate your hard work, everyone.
Thank you, Director Savage.
Yeah, I just want to be sure I'm understanding correctly. So our budget on the A&P is roughly around $1 million a year. So we would be doubling our budget within 5 years?
So
Because our budget's made up, is it entirely of the 3% hotel and lodging
totally,
tax?
yeah, 100%, the 3%.
So that means
1.2, and then we would be adding in another in year one, 346, so we'd be right around 1.5, but we would then be deferring partial of that payment into the facility to help support it. So we would have skin in the game through all this.
So for these numbers to bear out, we would have to be doubling the amount of hotel stays within 5 years. Would that be accurate?
For us to hit by year 5, yes.
Okay. And then how did we arrive at the numbers for the land lease?
So the land lease was actually given to us. I did have a conversation with the airport authority, and they provided us with what their, like, if we were to come in as a hotel, like, here's what it would be. We're hoping to negotiate that piece with them.
Essentially, the city owns this property.
Agreed. But again, you have to remember, as we came into this is all conceptual. Like, we were not going to walk down and start negotiating land or anything before. We weren't going to get ahead of you guys. Like, there's no reason for us to get ahead of you guys, and I wanted to give that professional courtesy, obviously, and make sure that we had the support before we started negotiating a lot of those deals. But yes, 100%, you're right.
I mean, so we're
guys own the
planning on
land.
over $275,000 a year on land we own. We're not leasing it back to ourselves. I mean, that's money that can come off the top, I think. Just by looking at it here.
They're over here saying that's a great start. Yes, 100%.
Okay, that's all for me. Thank you.
I also want to really quick, as you guys are looking at this budget, one piece that we did not cover, this capital improvement, the CIP, you're going to have to replace a hardwood court in 10 years because of use. That is also built into this budget. So there will be a pot of money that is consistently put into to cover capital improvements on the building that is built into the pro forma.
Well, wait, I do have one more question. So
I'll probably just open a can of worms.
do we know exactly, like, we kind of know what the impact for hotels is going to be, but what about the impact on restaurants? Do we have an idea of that based on previous projects you've done?
Yeah, so I'll speak to that real quick. So I can send it to you offline. That first green line, there's a number of rows that are hidden that breaks out what the total economic impact is into those categories of, and I don't know that I'm going to get all these right, but retail, restaurants, hotels, transportation, gas, and other. And so it's a breakdown of that total economic, that direct spending number, and how it was derived.
And so I would say too, if this was something we were going to pursue once we got into the construction phase, at what point do we go out and start marketing this to tournaments and saying, hey, we're building this, how do we get you here?
Before it gets to the construction phase.
Oh,
So,
even before?
Yeah, so,
So this thing's booked.
right, so in the development timeline of this, we were kind of back of the napkin earlier, is, you know, if we were at a point where you all said yes tonight, sign on the dotted line, we're ready to go, right? This is probably end of 2026. And so as we kind of push the timeline forward into your political process, really this is looking like early 2027. And so now you've got roughly a 18-month runway for Ashley and her team to go out and get those tournaments, to go out and get those sponsors. And so you're ready on day one. You've already got sponsorship revenue built up, but you're ready to start operating with a full stable on day one.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Director Settle.
Thank you. I didn't plan on speaking, but I'll speak. I got myself prepared. You know, my daughter plays volleyball. Most people know that, travel volleyball. There's a set schedule in volleyball. I'm just going to speak the facts that I know of. I'm not trying to sway anybody. But every year we go to the Redlands, first weekend of January. It's at the Bennett Event Center in the Stockyards. It's around a park in Oklahoma City. This year we have the Battle of the Fort the last weekend in January, first weekend in February. It's at the Convention Center, one tournament. Fort Smith Juniors put that on. This year we went to President's Day Classic at the Dome at St. Louis. 100 courts of volleyball. 4 courts, 4 teams apiece, 100 courts, a day shift and a night shift, back-to-back, one weekend. 100 courts at the Dome at St. Louis. And they had a tournament before that. We're going back to St. Louis. We're going back to St. Louis in a couple weeks for the Mid-East qualifier. Same place at the Dome. So we get to actually play in the St. Louis Rams old Dome. Then we go up to Kansas City, where they have over 100 courts playing at the Kansas City Convention Center for a qualifier. And then we go down to Dallas at the K. Hutchinson Convention Center and play in over 120 courts down there. So these are big tournaments we play in. What kind of to your mind is Memphis? We played at Memphis. Memphis is located at the Liberty Bowl. They typically have 2 tournaments a year. That's it. We did play at the 501 tournament. We're actually going to go down this week and play at 501 in Cabot. But the 501 was at Riverside Park in Benton, and it was a indoor swimming pool and basketball court location. But that got moved to Cabot because Cabot built a brand new facility. Vol in the Rock is 2 weeks later. It used to be at the Convention Center down at Little Rock. It's now at Cabot, 16 courts at Cabot. The Memphis place was unique because it actually had an indoor soccer, literally a indoor regulation side soccer with stadium seating next to that with basketball and volleyball courts. So those are what you are. You know, my issue is, you know, volleyball is January through end of April. That's the travel volleyball time, and you got a lot of qualifiers in there. So to really make this even close to doing something, you're going to have more than just a regional tournament. Because right now we're going to go down south. I did them out. I'm going to Little Rock this weekend. I think there's 4 FSJ teams. Out of 85 teams, 4 FSJ teams, 4 Oklahoma teams, and 8 out of the Louisiana Bayou area. That's it. The rest are going to be the regional teams in the Little Rock, Conway area. So they're all going to travel in, play for 8 to 2 or 3 to 8. It's typically times you play the morning bracket, afternoon bracket, and then you go to your hotel. My concern with this first project, there's a lot of stuff here, it's the location. If I was going to do this, my first thing is how do I maximize a park for this? Put it behind a hotel does not bring people in. I would put it in the middle of Ben Guerin Park. I'd go to the county and say, I'd put it in the middle of Ben Guerin Park. If somehow magically we had $33 million, some of the audience gave us $33 million, I'd put it in the middle of Ben Guerin Park. So that way there are other amenities you could try to. Putting it behind a hotel is not, every park that I've talked to is tied to another park. The grounds at Cabot, anybody can look it up, has a BMX park. Next to it's going to be an outdoor skating park, a pump track, walking trails, and mountain biking trails. And it's out in the middle of nowhere, but they're going to put a lot of other amenities to it. I think having it trying to be a walking distance for hotels is okay, but I think your bigger play is how do you tie it to another park so you maximize those other utilities. Because every other place that we go to that's not a massive qualifier, that's 100 courts, is tied to another park. It's tied to, Memphis at the Liberty Bowl. The Riverside Park is tied to the Saline County Ground Fairs, which has baseball to the south of that. Oklahoma City is tied to their stockyards and their park there. That's just the ones that I know about. If you go up in Northwest Arkansas, you have it's up in Springdale. It's the 8 courts up there tied to the indoor soccer field. I don't call it the Jones Center, but it's something else. It's up there in Springdale. That's where they play their Ozark plays theirs. So that's kind of where you're at. Tulsa's got a complex. Oklahoma City's got a complex. There's a big one in Kansas City with the Convention Center, St. Louis with their Convention Center and the Dome, and the big Convention Center in Dallas. And then the new grounds, and the grounds at Cabot is going to hold 3 tournaments this year, and that's it. The one at Lone Star is going to hold 4 weekends in a row. 100 courts, 4 weekends in a row for volleyball. But it's a national qualifier. And nationals are going to be in Dallas this year, too. So a lot of people are going to go there to get prepared for the national qualifier, too. So I just want the board to understand the facts from a volleyball standpoint. I do have concerns about the costing. To me, I think the location's the worst. I'm not a fan of it. I think I'm with Christina, it's our land, but I think if I had $33 million and gave it to you now, I'd be in the middle of Ben Guerin Park. Thanks, Mayor. Okay.
Thank you. Director.
Can I, really quick, I just want to chime in on this. 2 things. I love that your daughter is getting the opportunity to go to the nation's largest tournaments. I took my daughter to Colorado. We played in the Sparkler, which is hosted by Triple Crown Sports. It's across the Denver Metro. We were an hour away. There's over 600 teams that fly in to compete into that event. At the same time, there's also another tournament that's happening in Pennsylvania. There's another large-scale tournament that's happening down in Oklahoma City. There's another tournament that's happening down in Florida. They happen all over because not everybody can travel to those. Volleyball is in a unique situation. They tier out their teams. So for the upper group, there's always lower level teams that are still looking for that competition base. And I think that's where the Ezra data comes in and shows that there is a marketplace for this if you're not at those national qualifiers.
100% agree, and FSJ does hold smaller tournaments at their location.
Yes, and we've talked with them.
But part of what I'm trying to bring up is if you do build a new facility, you're probably going to take away from the convention center because that's what everybody else has done. Like it went from the convention center Little Rock up to the grounds at Cabot, went from the Benton up to the grounds at Cabot. So it's a new facility, it's bigger, more accommodating. We're going this weekend to try it, but I'm not. Yeah, there's different tiers of volleyball. There's just not one team. There's 2 other teams, 16s, 15s that got 3s. I think the 14s got 3-year teams. But that's just Fort Smith. You got a team in Greenwood. You got a team in Alma. There's a couple teams up in Northwest Arkansas, clubs. Each club has different teams. So I understand all that.
And that was really to help the residents understand that component because not everybody understands sports tourism. I will say that the reason why we honed in on this site is really about the event organizer and all the data that John and them have pulled. And their request is we want to be close to our hotels. We want to have our attendees that can walk in, park once, be done. We want close to restaurants. We want our attendees to have that experience. So we simply selected a site based on the data. But again, we have 4 or 5 in our back pocket and can obviously have that conversation with Ben Guerin. So it's not meant to be like this is the one, but we did put a lot of thought into it based off of what we're hearing from those tournament organizers.
Yeah, to me, I'd like to see what the options are before I go down in a path, because my thinking is some tournaments will go to the new center, some will lose, but are you going to bring, I don't even know the basketball side, I don't know the pickleball side, so I'm not even going to talk about that, but from a volleyball side, is there an opportunity to do more than 2 or 3 tournaments a year? And I don't know that.
And they're not the only tournaments. So it's jump roping, it is martial arts, it is jiu-jitsu, it is sports tech, which is volleyball on a ping pong table that Tulsa hosted that's international. Like, the number of sports that you can go after and host in an indoor facility is not limited by the traditional ones that we all know because we see them and our kids play them. It truly does become, I think there's one that's like, it's equestrian but on a stick. Like, it comes out of Finland, and that is starting to gain traction. Like, the niche fun things is what you're also going to be able to bring into this facility, because you're right, there's only but so many volleyball and basketball tournaments that you can host, and it's our job to go find the fun, exciting things that also complement what our community and our residents want to see, and support them in that as well.
Okay. Thank you, Director Kemp, Director Rigo, and then Director Neil Martin.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a few barrage of questions here as I've listened. One out the gate is, why not fully privatize this? You know, we talk about private funding. It looks, as I've looked at this screen now for a little bit and analyzed it, year one economic impact growth is $37.7 million in year one to $1.5 billion by year 10. So why not just fully privatize that and roll the bank?
Because the private side doesn't have the benefit of that economic impact, right? If I'm a private developer and I bring my own $33 million in and build this facility, y'all benefit from the economic impact. So I'm putting out $35 million and I'm getting $1.2 million over 10 years. That's my rate of return. If I'm a true private developer, I make a whole lot more money if I go build a hotel.
So on that note, when this is all paid out over the years, how much did the private group make in interest?
So one that we did recently, the interest rate was a little over 5%. 2.5% was their rate of return. 2.5% paid out municipal bonds and private equity. So like I said, the goal of this is not for a funding source to make the same rate of return as a true private equity firm that's investing in biotech.
Okay. What about on the review of the MPI? I don't know if we can pull that up instead when we talked about that earlier in the night. When you mentioned that MPI, it seemed as if basketball isn't going to be attractional, but I also might have misread that slide because we're having to go 300 minutes away. Is that true, or am I reading it wrong?
So the MPI on its face tells a story, but there's a second level, specifically when you're looking at these two. So when you look at, I'm going to take basketball first. So your MPI is 92 and 96 in your reasonable drive times, right? 2 hours. So what that tells us is, you know, from an absolute number, you're still at 120,000 kids, and the way they measure this is 120,000 participants in a paid basketball program, not just you going out and shooting ball with your kids. And so the numbers are under 100, which either means there's not the level of interest as there is for the average of the United States in that sport, or there's not sufficient facilities in those drive time radii to support the number of kids who want to play that sport. So that's one thing. The second thing I'll add, and this is back to Director Settle's comments on volleyball. The MPI of volleyball is generally higher than basketball because of the way the assets are. For every one basketball court, there's 2 volleyball courts. So by definition, even if it's not a world-class championship volleyball-specific only facility, if you go down to the local high school, they're playing volleyball on 2 volleyball courts on their basketball court. So by definition, you have more assets to offer the community of volleyball players, even though their absolute numbers are generally, and it's this case too, generally half in those 2 drive time radius that it is for basketball. Does that make sense?
It does. More questions, sorry.
Yeah.
I've been waiting for a minute. Why not improve the Civic Center? Why not privatize the idea that we already have a facility there that does host some tournaments? Why not consider privatizing that as a first beginning step before doing something like this? I know you probably have an answer to that, so I'm just asking to kind of hear the answer.
Yeah, I'll say that from our standpoint, there's no reason to privatize the convention center and basically turn it into a sports facility because we still need it for the convention meetings market. We actually are driving business. I shared on social media some of the math. No sporting events, but we're driving 5 events last year and drove about $1.5 million worth of economic impact. We're going to do 5 events this year, driving just over $2.2 million. 5 events next year, and we're still working on 2026. We're at 1.75.
You're talking about these are at the Civic Center?
These are at the convention center, and they're hosting cheer and dance, which will not be pulled from to support this facility because they really do belong at a convention
So the things
center.
you're mentioning are not things that would pull to this new building. They're going to stay.
They will
But
stay.
that y'all are helping that is what you're trying to say.
Yes, like we want, I mean, the great idea, whether it's at Ben Guerin or another site over on Phoenix, is that at the end of the day, we're filling the convention center and we're filling the sports facility. So we have 2 events that are the big fish in the little pond driving the
So does the
economy.
public just pay, like if there wasn't anything going on, and you mentioned earlier, like the hours of 11 to whatever, does the public in this model pay a low fee to come inside to play basketball or to walk the track, or what does that look like for a public citizen?
So that's not modeled in this model. If you guys as a community choose to do that, you can, but it's modeled as true public time. No different than if they went into their, a local rec center. And different communities, again, that we work with have different models. So some truly have, you can walk in to a community center and play basketball. Others are going to charge $3 or whatever. So
But you're saying you just did not build a cost into this?
we did not build a cost for community use. And community use typically is about 40% of the time of the overall operating hours of a sports facility.
So are the revenue projections, like attendance, spending, and tax revenue, based on independently verified data, or what happens if it falls short?
Yeah, so to answer the first part of your question, yes. So we've reached out, right, to tournament organizers very casually. Hey, if we build this thing in Fort Smith, would you host a tournament there? Yeah, we'd host a tournament there. How many would you host? We'd host 4. Right? We know, depending on the sport, what the quantity of assets are, or what the quantity of participants are, and work backwards in terms of spectators that accompany that participant, what their spending rate is, because of a lot of the operating facilities we have. Right? So we know kind of generally what a particular tournament or event is going to be able to generate revenue-wise. Right? And kind of back to Vice Mayor's points earlier, even if we're wrong, historically, it's been plus or minus 10%. And so if we're wrong, if we're overshooting this by 10%, you're making $1 million instead of $1.2 million. If we're underestimating it by 10%, you're making $1.4 million instead of $1.2 million. Right? So we've got high enough confidence in that to be here to present this to you guys.
So what are the city's financial obligations beyond lease payments, and is there any cap on these costs?
There is no financial commitment beyond the lease payments for the city, period, full stop, right? If at the end of the day, right, in the most black and white terms, that lease cost is, again, going back to the analogy I gave about leasing a car, you got to pay that lease payment, whether it's fully focused on the community or fully focused on sports tourism revenue.
If this facility underperforms, what options does the city have to renegotiate an exit or minimize its financial cost or loss?
Yeah, so we outlined two of those kind of minimization, risk mitigation strategies, right? One is putting together a reserve fund with sponsorships and naming rights at the beginning. So if it's short $200,000, you can pull from that instead of general funds. Number two is, even though in the early years a high percentage of A&P funds are used to support the facility, that conceptually goes down over time, but those funds are there as a second backstop before it comes into the city. The third way that we'll usually mitigate this is put responsibility on the operator for some portion of operating losses, but at the same time, there's a benefit to them if they outperform their budget as well, so long as you don't change the rules in the middle of the game, right? So the operator comes and says, well, I think we're going to make $500,000 this year. And halfway through the year, you say, you know what? We're going to shut this down for tournaments, no more tournaments. You've kind of changed the rules. You haven't given them the opportunity to generate revenue. That's not their responsibility.
So what if the city decided 5 years in, or we get to year 6, and it just seems like it's just not the best interest? What happens then?
So a couple things. So going back to the way the financing is structured, there's an annual appropriations requirement. So if this facility is operating profitably, technically, right, city doesn't have to appropriate funds. The only time you get into trouble is if you don't appropriate funds and there's a shortfall and all these safety valves get blown through, right? But to your point, or to your question, if 5 years from now you say, hey, you know what, we want to be out of this business, there's operators out there that with historical knowledge or historical experience could take over or could, quote unquote, buy out the city from their position. What that looks like now, I don't know, right? I can't detail that, but there are situations where operators will say, hey, you know what? I'll take you guys out. I'll pay this lease payment as part of operations, back to the same creditor.
And then the only thing, I thank you for your time. I appreciate that. I mean, the only thing I have heard from another sports ministry in town that does, work with sports has echoed that, they wish this was at Ben Guerin, and not the location that we're talking about. So those are just some thoughts that I have right now. Thank you,
and
Mayor.
I'll echo what Ashley said, right? Like, we had to put some spaghetti on the wall and just show what a building looks like on a piece of land so everybody can wrap their head around it.
Yeah.
But part of this next phase is to come back with the pros and cons of 5 or 6 different locations and a recommendation, and then it's in your hands, right?
And is that at a cost to the city to get to
No.
that point?
No.
So zero obligation to get to
I
that
think
point?
Ashley's going to read this next piece, and
Okay.
but that's all. What is going to be the ask is to come back to you guys. Do you want to explain that?
Well, I'm just going to say, as I wrap up my time, I feel the tension of, we always talk about we want more things to do in Fort Smith, and we want to do that. I think it's just at this particular moment that I think we've all felt over the last maybe 3 or 4 meetings, we're still trying to negotiate things with the federal government. And so I'm feeling that, as far as the timings of these conversations, knowing that we have progress, and, if we could sure hear about the thing we joked about with you about, do you do anything with sewer work? But I mean, if we could finalize our terms with that, it sure helps the whole picture in looking at how do you do what you do. Thank you.
Director Rigo and then Director Neil Martin.
Well, I guess all I would say, because my question was going to be, what's the ask of the next step, but I know you're going to present that yourself, Ashley. I guess this is a sort of a response to Director Kemp and to others who make this point. When you are faced as a governing body with expenses, challenges, costs, obligations you have to meet, there are 2 ways to address it. one of which is sustainable, one of which is not. The way that is not sustainable is, of course, and please hear me when I say this, when your focus is exclusively on cutting or pinching the penny or tightening the belt, all the euphemisms that get used, those are one-time things that you can do. You know, if you lose your job tomorrow, your job is your revenue coming in. If you lose your job tomorrow, could you sell everything you own and pay your bills for 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, 7 months, maybe a year, 2 years, 3 years if you have a lot of stuff? But as soon as you run out of the last thing you can sell, what do? You have no more revenue coming in. You can't pay the bills anymore. So yes, you have to cut. Yes, you have to be prudent. But those are arrows you get to shoot one time. Once you do a 30% reduction, that happens one time. So the other thing you have to look at as well is ways that you can increase revenue coming in to your entity. And things like sports tourism in a facility like this, and it's shown very clearly in the conservative model that was presented to us, that's something that generates revenue. And what I think is so beneficial about this model that's being presented to us tonight is, for the first time ever, we're being presented an option that does not require us to generate revenue ourselves in any significant way. It does not require us to come up with a new tax. It does not require us to tax the hamburger, was the last proposal, all these other things. I mean, this is, I think, something that we should very seriously consider. Thank you.
Director Neil Martin.
One thing that I would like to see with this economic impact and net income, I would like to see this in actuals for a facility that you guys have put together. 10 years, what did it start out as? What does it look like here? I know these are estimates, but I want to, and I'm assuming the estimates are based on actual somewhere. But I'd like to see a similar facility, kind of meets our demographics, that kind of stuff. And could you give me it's this facility here or in this location? I don't know if you can.
I can give you a region,
Okay.
Only because the operators that we work with are a little finicky
Okay.
about, opening their books when it's not kind of de-identified.
Okay. Well, if you could get it as close to, or maybe a couple examples in some different scenarios, that I'd just like to see what the actuals are versus the estimates.
Yeah, for sure.
Director Settle.
One last question. How many facilities have y'all done that have had a public-partner partnership that the public still funds it after 3 years?
That the public still funds
Funds it 3 or 4
subsidy?
years? Yeah, subsidy. Is it every subsidy every year?
No. Right, so the purpose of the subsidy is that most of these facilities are going to have to ramp up over the initial 3 to 5 years, right?
So after 5 years, is any of them still have a public subsidy that you put in together?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head, but I can put a list together for you for sure.
And do you have a list of all the facilities that you have done? Can we get a list of every facility where it's at, have you done?
Sure.
Thank you.
Director Cassanders.
Would there be any interest in continuing a project like this if it was just guaranteed by the AMP and not by the city funds?
I don't know why you said that.
No. Generally, no, but not for the reasons that you think. So the entity that is backing the project has to be investment grade, which means they have to have an independent credit rating and an independent bond rating.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
yeah,
We tried it. We sent financials.
Yeah.
okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions from the board?
Well, just what was Ashley's next?
Yeah.
We're going to let her finish up.
So obviously tonight's a presentation of concept only, and to provide a venue for questions and answers, which we've exhausted, I think, at this point, from the board about an indoor sports facility project that was just discussed. Our goal is to get your support to be added to a board of directors regular meeting agenda to bring forward a resolution for vote requesting board authorization for the city administrator to enter into an MOU with Synergy Sports, the AMP, and CAB Holdings to further develop the public-private partnership presented tonight. There is no request for funding allocation at this time. An MOU will provide non-binding support for the CVB and its partners to begin having concrete discussions on project costs, land availability, and project feasibility. Empowered by the board's support to flesh these ideas out, the team will be able to return with a fully vetted business plan for future consideration and execution. Again, we do understand that there is a vote that needs to happen in May, so we would not be bringing that to you until after the sales tax vote, and that information would also be implemented into the plan. So it is simply allowing us to go and start doing the legwork so that when you are prepared and ready to move forward, if that is so your wish, we are ready to go. Again, no dollars.
Well, I'd like to make that motion for the, I guess, the second voting meeting in March. So that's, what's next week? It's not, so not next week, whatever the March 18th.
We have a motion.
I'll second.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. At this time, we'll go to item 2.
Thank you, Mayor. At the February 4th regular meeting, the board asked the discussion of the vacancies of Director of Internal Audit and City Administrator positions be included on this agenda for discussion. This is the time for that discussion. So we have no structure to present, but let's start.
Director Rigo.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. I was the one that mentioned a couple weeks back that, this is a conversation we need to have. And so, I'm not trying to manage the thing in any sort of sense of my own, but I do think it's probably most sensible to at least first discuss where we're at with the internal audit director process, given that we have some, active applicants. And so I think we need to decide here tonight, at the very minimum, how we wish to proceed next steps with the internal audit process. And so, if I'm correct, were there 5 or 6 applicants that we had? Or?
There are, let's see, 5, 6, I think a total of 7 or 8 total applicants. 5 of them have been identified as sort of a tier A in terms of meeting our qualifications that we've published in terms of an ideal candidate. That information has been shared with you. So at this point, the recruitment firm is awaiting our determination of which of those tier A or of any of those candidates that we wanted to see more information from, and or start on the process of doing the video interviews to get the initial legwork done, and something for us to evaluate in terms of selecting finalists.
For what it's worth, I know it did not produce an outcome, and I think that was probably more candidate-based than process-based. I thought, broadly speaking, that the process that we had when we interviewed folks in the summer, wasn't terrible. I mean, most of us were able to get together and interview the folks. So that was just kind of what I thought.
Okay. Director Savage.
As far as the interview process goes, I don't know that the format was bad, but I don't know that we need all the outside input either. I mean, this is a board decision. It's one of our responsibilities. I don't know why we're bringing in people from outside the board to weigh in on these candidates. I mean, to me, it seems like too many cooks in the kitchen. I think the board needs to determine who we want to interview. I've let Jeff know who I found to be interesting, and I think we sit down together and interview them and knock it out.
Okay, any other comments? Director Settle.
I want to return the law back to Director Martin. We're currently using Baker Tilly. What's your thoughts on Baker Tilly? And my question is are they doing a good enough job? And that having an outside private firm that maybe specializes in audits, is it a good bridge gap, or is it something we could look at maybe doing a little bit longer? Just curious your thoughts, that's all.
I'll say a couple of things. Baker Tilly does do this. They will handle the audit function for municipalities, meaning they handle all of it. So we had an initial meeting with Baker Tilly. I mentioned this not too long ago. And right now, our primary liaison has been meeting with the two internal auditors, looking at their work, gathering documentation, all those kinds of things. So once she's finished with all of that, she's reached out and wants to meet to kind of just look at the work product. I would gauge her, I'd want to gauge her opinion on what she thinks the work product looks like, what she thinks about current staff, those kinds of things. So, once she finishes through that, we're going to sit down and go through that. She reached out to me February 5th, and I was kind of late in my response back to her, but I'm anticipating here next couple of weeks we would have a discussion. In my brief interaction with these guys, particularly Stacy Gill, who's our direct liaison, seems to be know what she's doing, but obviously I want to get into that a little bit more once we have a real discussion, just her and I. When we had the discussion, it was Andy and another individual from Baker Tilly. I want to get down into detail. What is she seeing in some of the work? Are there areas for improvement? In terms of putting together a work plan, where's she been in that? She's right in the middle of looking at the current utility audits that are underway, which we do have a section for everybody listening. We have a section, a number of audits specifically for utilities, centering around the consent decree and other things. So she's going through those, and I plan to get a better handle and more time with her in that discussion. But up to this point, she seems like she knows what she's doing, but I do want to have some real, better conversation.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Director Savage.
Well, I would say, I always say internal audit is our waste, fraud, and abuse department, and the way it's structured is that they are, a co-equal branch with administration. They report directly to the board. I don't know anyone at Baker Tilly. I haven't been in communication with anyone from Baker Tilly. So here we are. They're supposed to be reporting to us. I don't even know who to talk to. I mean, that doesn't seem like it lends itself to fighting corruption or, being on top of things. So I think we definitely have to have an internal auditor. We need someone who's accountable, who's visible, that we can point to and say, I want to speak with you about this. These are my concerns. I'm interested in an audit of that. Maybe Baker Tilly has been good to fill in the interim. This is our responsibility to fill this position. It's been vacant for about a year now, and we need to move forward with it. And I think we got some quality candidates. I was impressed with some of the qualifications of the candidates that we got.
Mayor, I have a question.
Director George Casavis.
Hey, Neil, what are we paying them a year, Baker Tilly?
I think it's $10,000 a month, so $120,000 a year. If they stayed a whole year, isn't that right? Wasn't it 10,000? Yeah. So current budget, I think.
Internal audit budget $600,000 total.
Excuse me.
Internal audit's total budget for 2025 is $601,000.
601,000.
That was if it was fully staffed.
Fully staffed and fully used all their funds.
So yeah, we're paying $120,000 for them.
I think a 120 is about what we'd be paying an auditor, in that range.
Somewhere around in there. Yeah, I think that was what Tracy's salary was. Somewhere.
So who from the city do they contact with an issue or a problem?
Me.
You're the go-between.
Yeah, I requested that. You guys were on board with it.
Yeah.
What's up?
And I'm still on board with that. I was in favor of that, but it seems like now we're putting it all on you versus collectively as a board taking responsibility for the audit function.
Well, and I think really my goal was to make sure that there was some kind of input, that it came to the board rather than the audit committee itself.
Yeah, no. And I think you've done a fantastic job. Not to take anything away from that. I don't mean it to sound like that, but I just think, we're putting you in a position where it is all on you when really it's everyone's responsibility equally.
So let me ask one more question. Do they have any direct contact with finance department?
Yeah, I think Andy was the initial
No, I mean, going straight to them, bypassing you.
I hope not.
Well, that's what I'm
I
getting,
mean,
that's what I'm wondering.
what I've said, what I tried to do is get Andy out of the picture, because this is ours,
Yeah.
not Andy's. So, I intend to have those discussions with.
Well, I know during the audit of the shelter, there was, some serious questions being brought up about this.
Sure. And I mean, that my whole goal that I was or that someone from the board was the liaison was specifically for that, so that there was not any communication with city management.
But if they're bypassing you, going directly to finance, there's a problem.
Right, I would agree with that, and that would be what I would not, I mean, maybe they talked to Andy about a contract, I don't know that.
What do you think, Andy? What's the verdict here?
Since the initial phone call that Director Martin and I had with Stacy Gill and the partner over that, I have zero communication with Baker Tilly. I paid the bill, but I've not gotten an email.
Okay.
And I have, at this point, I don't know what's, Director Martin has the information on what's going on, but I have not had any communication with
Do
them.
you get a monthly itemized copy of their billing, exactly what their bill being?
It's just a flat $10,000 bill every month.
Regardless if they do anything or not.
Right.
I am.
Which I was against. I voted against that.
That's ridiculous, Andy.
I am going to request hours. I mean, I think that's they owe that to us.
Well, yeah, they
I
owe
want to know if
something.
I want to know if they're spending 100 hours or 10.
Well, yeah, duh. I mean, that's just.
I know it's not going to
That's
change.
just general business practice, just common sense business practice.
It's not going to change any how we pay them, but I just want to see.
Maybe we need to get Elon Musk down here and look into it.
Well,
Yeah. Hey,
I mean,
that's.
he's got bigger fish to fry, I think, right now. But
Yeah.
we can do our own Doge here.
Well, we need to.
Yeah.
Director,
All right, thank you, Mayor.
okay, Director Kemp was next in the queue, and then Director Rigo.
I share Director Christina Casava's comments on let's interview these candidates in a timely manner. I think that the Tier A had 5 candidates and 1 had already interviewed and wasn't selected, so pick the next 4 and let's schedule those interviews as soon as possible. And then I would think in the meantime, I would propose that maybe is there a possibility of doing an executive session and a job performance review of the company that we've contracted with? I mean, if we're paying $10,000, can we have a webinar in an executive session to hear an update? I mean, sure, that could be.
Boy, I would.
No, you cannot.
I was going to say, I'm not sure that is a personnel evaluation. I mean, that would be we could do that, but it would be an open forum.
We need to
That
be
doesn't
more
make any,
efficient. I mean,
but
talk about bringing Elon. We need to be more efficient, getting this knocked out.
well, I guess what I'm saying is, I guess I want to push on this for a second. Why would that not be a job performance?
Because it's not a personal issue that the board has direct. It's a contract issue.
Okay, all right, moving forward. I would say that we come up, because it seems like when I hear these discussions in past and even current, that we probably need to come up with a best practice policy and a project list that this board's in agreement with, or otherwise we've contracted a group to do what? Or when the internal auditor does get filled, to do what? I mean, the one thing I do want to make a comment is that, an auditor is not a weapon. The plan is not to get somebody to come in here and go, gotcha. The plan is to figure out how to help us make sure that when we do get an external audit from a federal agency, we don't fail it. So, I mean, we need to catch people doing right. We need to find ways to improve. It's not always assuming malpractice. I mean, so that's why I say for me, then let's come up about a policy, best practice, project list so that we actually get what we all think we want. Otherwise, you've got one person working for 7 bosses. I mean, if we don't come to a uniformed idea of what that looks like, then it is doomed to fail. So I think we just need to define success, interview as quickly as possible, because I don't think you're going to get that kind of return maybe from that agency, because it sounds as if there's a check valve already that makes it not approachable for board members, if that is somebody to report to. We just need to find a way to move that ball forward. Thank you.
Okay. Director Rigo.
Thank you, Mayor. Building on what Director Christina Casava said and Director Kemp said, I think we need to express, at least via 4 of us, concurrence in direction to administration, because at this point, it's also just a kind of a professionalism issue. I mean, we posted the job on the 7th of January, the job closed on the 7th of February. It's coming up on a month since it closed. I would like to see some concurrence on directing administration to schedule interviews with the people that remain in the pool, either in person, if they wish to come, or via Zoom. And those of us who are able to participate on the days, participate. And obviously, those of us who are able to participate, bring back to the group what our thoughts are. And then we need to decide. But I mean, we could, clearly it's within our capacity to talk extemporaneously and abstractly about the notions and efforts and philosophies around internal audit, probably until we, keel over and die. But tonight, we have to figure out how to proceed with the 6 or 7 people that are actively in the applicant pool. And I'd like to see interviews scheduled as quickly as possible. Sounds like Director Kemp would like to see that. It sounds like Director Christina Katsavas would like to see that. And so
Is that a motion?
Well, it's a request for concurrence and a motion to have these things scheduled, no later than the end of March. Mr. Dingman?
What I might add to that, and Mr. Lawley's here, you can correct me if I say anything incorrectly, but there are the 5 candidates in Tier A that have been identified. We have interviewed one of them in person and did not select them. So what I might suggest is, with the remaining 4 that are in Tier A, work with SGR to conduct the video portion of the interview, because that's a typical sort of mid-range step. You identify folks that you want to see more about, have them identify a set of generic type of questions that are job-related kind of things, and you see their responses via video, and then from that we can work, and we can do that with all 4 of these potentially, and from that we can work to select finalists from that we then would bring in town for an in-person type of interview.
I mean, in the abstract, that sounds fine to me, because since we have paid SGR and we crossed that bridge, we may as well use it, because I believe the sentiment was expressed a few moments ago about, paying for things that don't really have a use. So, I mean, I understand that, there's probably a use for, at least at some juncture, the services of SGR to help get to a point where we have actual human beings to interview, either in person or via video, as soon as possible. And quite frankly, it's just like anything else. Directors have the ability to participate as little or as much as they wish, but if there's at least 4 of us who want to, move forward on this process, that's would constitute a working majority.
Okay. Do we have 4 members? 1, 2, 3. Okay. Very good. Thank you. Okay.
Just out of concert, comment, not adding to the 4, but I'm not opposed to the 4. Director Martin, you're the liaison for the board for the audit. I know you mentioned, as well as Director Katsavas, keeping Mr. Richards out of the conversation. Do you speak regularly, or do you speak with the members of the audit committee?
I have communications with some folks on the audit committee. Not often, but I do.
Well, and I don't. I do serve on that committee, and I can't recall.
Hold on. Did you say audit committee
The
or
audit
audit
advisory.
staff?
Audit advisory.
Oh, okay.
committee.
No, I haven't had any communication with them.
Okay. I only ask because, we are talking about filling the vacancy, but in the conversation, I don't want it to be overlooked of the professionals that we have on the audit advisory committee, that we rely on for their professionalism and comments to the board. So at no time do I want any member of the board to think that, I'm sorry, you may or you may not have a degree in being an auditor, but these people are professionals and we rely on their input to us.
Okay. Thank you. Director Kemp.
Yeah, just to Director Good's comment, I think that, once again, is why I would love to see us discuss what are the projects, and maybe that's what Baker Tilly and our staff come back with. What are the projected projects for this year? I know obviously we can make changes as the year goes. What is our policy? And then when I think about that audit advisory committee, what is the best practices of why they exist? What are the things that they're tasked to do? How should they relate to us as directors? How should we as directors lean to them and their expertise? To me, this process seems oddly vague when it should be really crystal clear. I mean, on paper, like, this is how we do this. And so I think if we need a form discussion around that, I think that would be really advisable.
Okay. Thank you. Okay.
Would it be possible for administration to send around to us, what the last implemented audit plan looked like, and maybe a little backgrounder as to how typically audit plans have been constructed, and what not only how they look, but what's sort of the physical pathway for them happening? Because as was mentioned earlier, we're coming up on 2 years, give or take, of being outside of the usual practice, and so a refresher from you, Mr. Digman, is probably beneficial to all of us as a building block.
Director Neal
Well,
Martin.
now, I know that we've always approved an audit plan for the next year. We did that in 23, which was going into 24. 24 should have been completed throughout the year. Now, where we are not, what we don't have is one for 25, which is where Baker Tilly's coming in. But the audit staff, our internal audit staff, the board, all speak into that, and then we develop a plan for how. And half of it is utilities, half of it is, and I don't know if 50-50 is the right word. Half of it's utilities, half of it's the rest of the city, or it could be 60-40 either way. But that's normally what happens. So we just haven't received or haven't gotten a 25 plan. And what Baker Tilly's also doing is, of the 24 plan, what got completed there, and what still needs to be, what's still left undone. So that's kind of how we've arrived here.
May I make a request of you, Director Martin?
Sure.
As the liaison, and this maybe sounds more jerky than it's my intention for it to be, but if you're going to be the liaison, liaise. And so I would like, if it's possible, on a weekly basis, we have the opportunity to speak every week on whatever we like. If there's something to share or a conversation of any substance that you've had with Baker Tilly during that director's forum portion, would you mind, sharing a little bit with us?
I have. That did kind of sound a little jerky, but
well, I don't recall hearing anything of note.
well, I mean, they've just started. I mean, they're barely into this process. So I gave an update last week, kind of the similar type things, and then the initial conversation we had sometime in January or maybe early February. Can't remember exactly when that was. And then the next communication is going to be our first face-to-face interaction, and then I should have additional information.
Perfect. And so it speaks to, I guess, in a roundabout way, the point is made to, my colleague from Ward 4 that, this is a very new relationship, and it's not necessarily one that, all the details have been filled in yet. So there's more to it than just the number itself.
Get it? Thank you. Okay, thank you. Director Settle, I think you were in the queue.
Yeah, Mayor Report, I just let you know I have to leave. My daughter's last cheers tonight, so I'm going to head out and watch my daughter cheer last night. So I'll let y'all continue the conversation, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for being here. Okay, if there's no further discussion on that, we will go to, why don't we take?
Well, the other part, Mayor, was just about the part 2 of item 2 was about the city administrator. And I mean, I just was going to speak to, as we took a step at the meeting last Friday, the rescheduled meeting, to, formalize the acting role of our city administrator and adjust our acting city administrator and, adjusted his salary a little accordingly. And I think, certainly a sense that I have, and, others could speak to it or not, is, we are I am comfortable with Mr. Dingman fulfilling the role that he's fulfilling now, and he's got lots of responsibilities and things moving forward, and we want to see him succeed. I do.
Thank you.
I agree with that,
concur.
since I'll leave him. Thank you. I agree with Jerry.
Any other comments on the administrative section? Director Good?
Yeah, I also agree, and not only personally, but in speaking to staff, I believe in my conversations with staff that we're more than comfortable, but we're confident in the guidance of Mr. Dingman serving in that role.
Okay, and I concur with that as well. If there's no further discussion on that, why don't we take 10 minutes and we'll return and go to item number 3.
Thank you, Mayor. Item number 3 tonight is a review of the 2024 carryover request. This discussion started at our meeting last Friday. And we talk about the carryovers and carry forwards from the Finance Department. So to further address this item and lead the conversation is our Chief Financial Officer, Andy Richards.
So we did put in the packet that we sent out yesterday, since we had our meeting on Friday. I did make some revisions to the schedule that I attached, and got with some of the departments and went through some things. One thing is we categorized all the list into the 4 different funds, so we've got subtotals. So I think Friday night, the list had about $3.6 million. We got it down to $3,466,000 that we took off. But the total of that is general funds, carryovers, requests, total $3,148,000. Solid waste, the request is $158,000. Street maintenance fund is $146,000, and the water and sewer fund is $13,000. And then, we talked about some of these items, went back and looked at. There are some contracts or some agreements that are behind some of these items. They weren't entered into the system as a purchase order, so they didn't get on the carry forward list, but they're on this list. So there's a note to the right side on this list of if there is some type of commitment. I wanted you to know that. And then, so the rest of it, you can kind of see the justification that was provided by the different departments. And I think most of the departments heads are here. If there's specific questions about specific items, if I can't answer it, then hopefully they'll be able to provide an answer. But I'll open it up for questions or discussion, I guess.
Thank you. Director Rigo, you are first in the queue.
Thank you. And the question that I have is for Ken, Mr. Savage, as it relates to the compressed natural gas fueling station. Certainly in and of itself seems like a worthwhile thing to shoot for and aim for, and that's sort of ironically, given the name slow fuel expansion, it's a thing that's supposed to allow faster fueling. Do I understand that correctly?
That's correct, Director Rigo. Thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah.
The slow fill system allows the operators at night to simply connect a hose to the buses and allows the buses to fuel overnight in lieu of standing there and compressing fuel into the system on the buses. So it's quite a bit of a time savings that we would be experiencing by, being able to connect that to it. And FTA supports alternative fuels and provides 90% reimbursement for the cost of the construction.
So my question is just because, $750,000 is a substantial amount of money. Understand that there's a contract in place. Sort of the justification in the note there seems to be that there would be a reduction in staff needed. And so I just wondered if you could tease out a little bit what the current, number of staff you're currently utilizing to do this function and kind of, how, I guess, what's the size and scope of the staff that's currently being used?
Sure. We have 10 routes that are active every day. That as they come in, they have to, plug these, or they have to fuel up these buses when they come back. And so, we've started, you could spend as much as 40 to 50 minutes to fuel each bus, even with a fast fill system. We've learned that we can get by with fueling 20 minutes a day. And so you can expect that there would be a 20-minute a day per bus savings by having this system and being able to fuel them at night. And it would fuel the buses up to 100%, and there's these buses will operate 2 full days, almost 2.5 days on a full tank of fuel. And right now, we're only filling them up to about 80% because it's just not necessary to keep filling them every night and spending a bunch of time for something that's not needed each day. So,
Sure.
But the slow fill will actually improve the efficiency of that. And in turn, we were looking at making some fixed route adjustments hopefully this year. And with that, we feel like the offset that we can do with that would be to actually start the fixed routes 30 minutes earlier. So add some operational time to the citizens, giving them services where right now we're spending that time fueling buses.
And so one last thing, you talk in the narrative about there's been some delays in the design due to available qualified sources, as the language says in the write-up. If this carryover were to carry forward and the $750,000 remained, I mean, here at this juncture, almost at the beginning of March, what is your confidence level in being actually able to implement this in 2025? Has there been progress?
Yeah, very good. I mean, we went through a slow period where we had some difficulty in finding the technical source to do that. But we actually have a meeting this Thursday to meet with that technical source and with the architect to go ahead and finalize the design. There is some design that was done when we had the initial fast fill station, designed. And so there is some slow fill component design that's attached to that. So this will allow them to get the technical piece that they need done, and so that we can move forward on it. So we're real excited and real confident that we can move forward with that pretty quickly.
Thank you. And I neglected to say at the beginning, thank you, Director Martin, for your leadership in making sure that we had the opportunity to have this additional commentary and question time this evening. Thank you, sir.
Director Neil Martin.
I do have a couple questions. Now, my primary issue was with water and sewer. It looks like with this one, there's not as significant an amount. But I do have a question about the solar canopy, $1.4 million for the solar canopy. If I remember correctly, that was going to be funded out of grant dollars. Is that correct?
Well, there was 2 or 3 different projects, right? One was going to be a tax credit, the other one's a grant. This one is funded by the city, but this is the one for the farmers market. We were going to front the $1.4 million for the project, and in return, we get the reduction in electricity costs.
Okay, so this was not.
This is not the grant. There was another one that was grant funded, and then the other one was some tax credits, direct paid tax credits.
Okay. Okay. I mean, water and sewer is my main concern. We got our preliminary financial statements, which looked really good as we headed into, or as we were going into 2025. But with these encumbrances or the carryovers and carry forwards, that's reducing them significantly. Some comes out of the general fund. What that does is that eliminates our ability to be able to do things like a sports complex, things like slides at a water park. I mean, those things. We've even talked about slides at a water park and the concerns associated with those. But the more we draw down that balance, which I think, we really got to see the true financial numbers. We're in the 20 some odd percentile, or 20% of fund balance in the general fund, which that doesn't give us a lot of leeway, because if we go under 20%, I think if I remember right, there's some things that start to kick in at that point in terms of you don't hire staff, those kinds of things. So.
If our year ends that way.
If our year ends that way, and I think this is coming out of 2025 funds. Am I correct on that? So 2024 will not fluctuate as much, but this will come out of 2025, which I think we already was in a deficit. But we've got to be very careful of that and Really, my major concern is the debt covenant requirement with water and sewer. Because if that's not at 110%, that means we've got to, there has to be another rate increase. And that's what I'm trying to avoid. But knowing that in this amount, there's not a significant amount going to water and sewer, I think I can potentially be okay with it. That's the concern and the things that I want us as a board to think about, because that's gonna hit us quickly.
Director Rigo.
Thank you, Mayor. And the question I had, maybe it's for Jeff or for Andy, when you look at, and saying this as a person who voted, and was a supporter of the water slides at every juncture, and I, make no bones about that. The $75,069 that's here on the carryover requests, remaining amount in 2024 needs to be carried over to 2025. Funds are for the water slides. Is this this is not, oh, hey, we're $74,000 short and we need $74,000 more, to finish this. Does that reflect a portion of what we already voted on that just has not yet been allocated?
So we appropriated $2.1 million in '24, which was half of it. That's what's left over. We've spent the first $2 million, and so
this is not an additional ask.
No, this is to go towards the installations, just like as planned.
Yep. Thank you for that clarification.
Okay. Thank you, Director Christina Casavage.
So Andy, on the solar panels at the farmers market, when we get that money back, is it as an energy credit or it's off our energy bill?
It's going to be in the form of reduced energy costs.
Okay, I was just curious about how we budget for that. So,
I mean, and it's going to be over a period of, 10 or 15 years or 20. I can't remember what the time frame was on the deal. I've got the backup, but it's over several years.
Yeah, I think it was less than 10, if I remember correctly.
Okay, that may have been.
Okay, thank you.
Director Kemp.
Thank you, Mayor. Andy, I don't really have questions about this per se as much as I wanted to think about when we talk about allocations and readjusting things, because I understand where you're like, hey, I want to help utilities, I want to try to meet our covenants, and I'm in the same game, but is that not also spending down the general fund if we make those changes? That's another part of this, that's a driver. Can you speak to that? Or how does that impact the percentage and where we lay as far as 19 or 20%?
Are you talking about I think there was a discussion about taking 5 of the admin programs and not having them allocated and keeping them out of the general fund? Was that what you're referring to?
Yeah, because I know I'm wondering if that's the interest. That's why I'm trying to, I guess it's a question for him and for you, really. Is that sort of the thought process was to help utilities, but also, it will impact our general fund, if I understood that correct.
It will bring it down.
So for in that scenario, so when I brought this Friday night, I had this built in, and I had the carry forwards built in, and I showed like a $14 million projected general fund balance. That was 19%. And the allocation had the new allocated percentages that I showed you, but it had these 5, like the ones we were talking about, were included. So if I go back and I looked at it today, if I take the allocations of those 5 programs back to the general fund, which it's actually 4, because sustainability, I'd stopped allocating that already. So
you stopped allocating that?
Yeah, that's strictly general fund for 24 and 25 already. So it was the other 4.
Okay.
So that took $2.2 million back to the general fund. So my projection was $14 million at 19%. And so if we redo that allocation, and this was for 24, so that's $2 million less on that $14 million projection. And then whatever we have set up for 25. So, we're talking about, let's say, another $2 million. You're
So that's my
definitely going to
point.
be
We're
in
getting
the,
at 10 million or 9 million, right?
Well,
you're going to
that?
definitely be in that 15% contingency
this
range.
gets lower than it's been probably since my time on the board in 2019, which kick-ins happen at 20%. I think that's either you cut staff or you don't hire people. I mean, that's one thing.
I guess the question I'm asking is, just don't do it this time. If you don't make those allocations this time to keep your fund balance up.
So what I think.
I mean, it was only netting the utility department $200,000.
It would help the water, for 24, it would help the water and sewer fund $1.2 million.
So
and that's not enough to get you to the 110%.
110% is where we've got to be, and that gets us 1.2 million. I feel like we've got to look at other things. I know Director Rigo has some items that we've got to look at, because what the bondholder will say is in 23, we were at 108%, so we didn't meet it. In 24, we're not getting close to 108%. We were like 95%. So if we show up at 95% or 100%, that's going to equal a rate increase. That's what the bondholder will say.
No, I feel that. The tension I'm feeling is by making that allocation change for 2024, it gives it 1.2 million, still misses the mark, and it brings us down in this year. Whereas, I mean, I'm at the place of why not call that a loss and make good practices going forward and not feel the tension of the general fund draining itself down as well. Because, I mean, every time we make a decision like this, we're literally like hitting our hand with the hammer, so to speak, because we are below that mark. So it's not like, will we be below the mark? We are below the mark. And then to further do that, just to me, now, I guess where I'm at on this stuff, I felt like this was contractual work. The only thing I have is a couple questions on this particularly, and then if you want to speak to the other one, you can. What happened to those utility items? I mean, there were more utility items that are on here, and then now they're not on here. I mean, is this stuff that's going to bite us by not doing?
There was only $15,000 on the carryovers for the water and sewer fund Friday night. There was a $2,000 item that got taken off, and so that's, there were, most of the impact of the water and sewer fund was because of the things that are already encumbered. And under
I just wanted to make sure that we didn't tell utilities to go cut all this stuff, and then now we're going, why can't you do this? And then we're sitting here taking out the rug from them. The other one is, and this is just because I think it's obviously before I was on the board, but this, the Oak Cemetery, is that a city cemetery, I guess? I mean,
Yes.
for us taking on the $150,000 project? Okay.
Yes.
I just wanted to confirm that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dingman, did you have any comments? We'll go to Director Rigo and then Director Christina Cassatt.
Sure. My only comment really is based on something I mentioned earlier, is that 25, the projection for 25, if it gets down into the 15-16% range right now, I mean, that presumes that we spend every other dollar in the budget. And so we will not end the year at 15 or 16%. We will end the year at 20% or better, just because we typically do. And we have already implemented things like a 10% hold on. I mean, the budget is still the budget. Administratively, we're administering a 10% hold on all of those items, and so that will create some room for us. And we'll monitor that throughout the years to see if and when we can remove that and see how that works. We will end the year above 20%.
Okay, thank you. Director Rigo.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to build on what Director Kemp was saying, because the reality is, if you just change, do the theatrics of changing the allocations, how our top lines on the 12 departments that take some amount from the water and sewer fund, if you just change some of those to go, oh, well, they should all just come from the general fund, to your point, sir, that's not actually helping the financial health of anything. You're just rearranging where the money's coming from, and indeed, you're putting more of a burden on the general fund. So, as a general rule of thumb, I don't think a workable or productive solution is to just say, well, everything should come out of the general fund and we should change some of the allocations. What I'm driving towards and what I'm going to be, sharing with folks early next week is you have to have, and I'll say it publicly, and I'll say it to department heads and folks, that everyone that is doing the hard work. And I'm encouraged by what Mr. Dingman just mentioned, and the tight attention that Mr. Richards and Mr. Dingman and others are paying to things. But we have to put actual reductions in spending on the table, not rearrangements of spending. And we have to make tough choices about what has been budgeted for 2025. And of course, budget's a dynamic document that changes, and the true financial picture changes every month. And a budget, when it's implemented, is of course generally in our city a conservative best projection looking forward. But I'm just saying, I think you can't just rearrange where spending comes from. You have to legitimately put some reductions on the table. And so I just thank you, Director Kemp, for pointing out the challenge that it gives to the general fund to just zero out allocations and make them 100% general fund for departments. That maybe solves visually or optically a challenge, but it creates one as well.
I would agree, and one other comment, if I could sneak onto your time, would be that administration does work on utilities. So, the reason that it was set that way originally was when they do that work in that department is getting administrative oversight and look at. So it's not like these allocations didn't come with the original intent. And I think that's something I want us to remember, that administration is going to have to work on those things.
Director Savage.
This makes me angry, because it wasn't 6 months ago we were sitting here saying, the general funds, what was it, 40%, and we have to spend the money. We have to buy those water slides. And that was said in this room, and it's on camera. We have to spend it. And now here we are, just on a spending spree, and now we're in a situation where we're, I don't know that I would characterize it as theatrics, because it's not theatrics to say that if water and sewer have to support themselves, we shouldn't be taking money out of that fund, especially when we've bonded money and we owe money to people. My question, Andy, was, we were leasing the building. Now we don't have those lease payments anymore. Was that money coming out of the general fund?
Yes.
Okay, so that's an expense we won't be incurring, or at least, I know we've got maintenance, but not to the extent that we were.
Yeah, I think the annual lease was about $350,000 a
It
year.
would have been about 400 for 2025.
So, yeah, we've got, like you said, maintenance and things. We're going to have to insure it, the building, after we close and things, but, yeah.
Okay, so that's money that'll still be in the general fund. All right, thank you.
Director Neil Martin.
One thing I did want to note, I had challenges with the budget as presented. I wanted these allocations, to Director Rigo's point, I wanted those allocations to be put in place before the budget was approved. That wasn't the case. I voted against the budget. I believe Director Katsavis and Director Katsavis voted against the budget. So we're on a 4-3 vote. And now we're talking about making cuts. I think this is kind of the point of not voting for the budget.
Yeah, I tried to table it for more time to review, and it was my motion, it didn't get passed.
To Director Kemp's point, and I've heard you say it, you and I can't remember the context around it, but you said, I'm not voting for another water rate increase. If something happens, I'm not voting for another water rate increase. What this is doing, this is forcing you to have another water rate increase, forcing you to where you don't have a choice because you're not meeting the debt service requirements. So whatever we need to do in order to meet those debt coverage requirements, and I don't know if I'm using the right terminology, but I think we've got to do those things, because you're not going to have, the choice is going to be taken away from you. We've heard receivership. That's when we get it. I remember when we were voting on that water rate increase, you gave 3 or 4 different things that were going to happen if we don't meet 110%. One of those things was receivership. One of those things was they can come in and just say, your rates are this. You don't have the option. So everything we have to do is, I mean, at some point, if we have to do a water rate increase for a capital project or whatnot, I think we can do that. But we've given them we've put in a water rate increase. We put a sewer rate increase. And if we don't play our cards right, we're going to have to put in another water rate increase. That's what I'm trying to get. That's where I'm trying to get away from.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate the discussion. I would actually say the concerns I have are not so much, if we want to do the allocation thing is something to go forth, but where does this equipment that he needs bought going to come from? And my point is, if we allocate that 1.2 for last year, we're taking away from the money we could buy equipment from going forward and allow a loss to be truncated to 1 year. The comment about not voting for water rates until we fix things is directed towards the water leaks.
Okay.
I don't want to raise anyone's water rates with 800 water leaks logged to be repaired. And so I don't want to raise their expenses if we haven't tried to curb our expenses. Sure. And obviously the drill down, they're saying they need equipment. So my questions are more like, how much equipment can they get for that 1.2 versus trying to make the books look like it didn't get as much of a loss? It had a loss, and if I understand right, Andy, I mean, even the 1.2, we're still like needing another $6 more million to meet the bond covenant for the year or something like that, wasn't it? It was about $7 million. So I think the point is, instead of trying to make up the bond covenant number, I'm more, let's get the equipment to fix the leaks, and let's see what expenses that does curb over time incurring. The water rates that were passed were significant, and the thing that we're hearing is it was more significant for some people than it seemed like it was going to be, which means there's revenue there. So, what does that look like? But what I was trying to do is get in front of saying we cannot have this many leaks and talk about water rates.
We have to have additional conversations about the 2024 budget and the 2025 budget, specifically how it relates to water and sewer, debt service coverage, and how equipment fits into that. Because once you buy equipment, that becomes operating expense, which then comes into changing your numerator or your denominator, which then widens your gap even more. So
that's where I'm at. That's why I'm saying if I have to choose between those two, I would choose equipment over trying to make the backlogs look better.
Well, you're agreeing to a water rate increase.
No, I'm agreeing to water leaks being fixed.
Right. But if your denominator changes on that, your debt service coverage gets wider. You don't make 110%. The bondholder says you have to raise rates.
You lose the choice.
You don't have the choice.
You don't get a choice. It's either you go into receivership or you raise the rate.
And it's probably not receivership. That's probably not where we're at, but that would be 2 consecutive years that we haven't
That was
hit.
what they threatened us with last year.
Does that not seem like a zero-sum game, though? I mean, if I know I'm not going to make it, even if I give you the 1.2 in that, and I know you're $6 million short, I'd rather say, let's say that was short because we passed the water rates too late in the year, and we're going to have a full year of water rates that have already been approved. We have an opportunity in the next 3 to 5 months to curb our leaks down to a low number, and then we can kind of see where we are. I think that's going to look better. But I mean, Andy, you seem like I cut you off.
I just, I'm giving you these numbers so that you have information, but I have to caveat the precision of these numbers.
Right.
We're getting to the point to where, I still have to make certain adjustments to the water and sewer books. We have to combine some of the other activities. So it's getting to the point where, I can tell you we're not going to make it. I can't tell you that right now.
That's what I think we need to know.
I don't think
we need
the
to know
reallocation by itself is going to get you there,
Right.
but I'm just saying there are other adjustments that I may have to make that could take it higher or lower.
Right.
And I can't tell you what those are because we're getting that close to how tight it is.
And that's where, those are the discussions we have to have in order to be able to move forward. I mean, the citizens got to, I think the citizens got to know if we're going to hit 110% or not, with all these different variables that are going to work its way out. The citizens got to know, because that would be 2 consecutive years of missing our debt service coverage. And year one was, you could go in receivership, they could come in and tell you what your rates are. 3 and 4, there were other things. Now it would be 2 years in a row. So I think the penalty or the outfall of that is more difficult than just 1 year, even though we raise rates. So we got to see what the rates, those 5 months of rate increases were. We got to see what the rate increases are going to do for 25, because we sure as heck don't want to do it 3 years in a row if we actually miss it in 2 years. So that's what I'm saying. We got to have some additional conversations around all of these things in order to be able to know what we're going to do, what we're going to need to do in 25 or not do in 2025.
Do you expect to know sort of by the middle of the year, or do you expect to have a fuller, better, more comfortable sense of projecting on that bond covenant topic, by the halfway point of the year?
Yeah.
Because of course it's February.
Yeah, I expect that we'll be wrapping up the audit, and by then I'll know that, the auditors have checked everything, and I'll have all the adjustments in. I'll feel pretty comfortable by June.
I mean, once the auditors are done, we're done.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, when does their engagement start?
They'll be here in April.
Okay. So there's not a lot of wiggle room that we've got to come together and discuss.
I mean, as I update these numbers, I will share what I have. So, but it's like I said, it's not going to be final until the auditors sign off on it, right?
Director George Casavas and then Director Kemp.
Go ahead, Lee. I'm still thinking.
Well, I guess where I'm at, because when I watched that conversation, it seems as if you're telling Director Martin that you think there's a chance that we're going to meet those bond covenants. Is that, because when I read the data, it doesn't look like we're going to get close. So, but then I hear you answering him, and it seems like maybe we do. And I mean, obviously, if it's 1.2 million gets us to it, 1,000% like do that. But from my understanding of the data was that 1.2 leaves us a lot short.
It does. But I'm saying there are other adjustments at play.
Okay.
And I don't know. I mean, we may never get there. I'm just trying to
Well, the fact
set
that we're
the
not covering
expectations
the
that we're
credit
not
card fee
finished,
should help, right?
but
Well, one question I guess would be,
That's a huge chunk.
so then Andy, my question would be, is there anything that the board could do to help get those numbers sooner than later? Instead of, I know that, or is it just the process is the process?
it's the process. One of the main things is we have to analyze the collectability of the receivables at the end of the year. And so if the longer I wait, I typically wait till I have about 3 months worth of collections after year end to see how good the collections are. I like to have real data. And so that is an estimate that I have to make. When we adjust those allowances for those collectibles, it can raise the revenues up or down depending on what the estimate was last year and how we're doing this year. So do I think that's going to adjust and be $6 million? No, but it could be $1 million, and it's been $1.5 million or a couple $1 million before. And you throw that in there with some other things that I have to adjust, I'm saying it could go back and forth.
It's going to be razor thin.
So, yeah, then that was the point I was trying to make. We're getting to the point where it's razor thin and anything could make it go one way or the other. And I just want to make sure that, I set the right expectations with you all with my communications on this.
Director Casavas, George.
I mean, Andy, about a year or so ago, I remember that we were going to invest some city money in stocks, bonds, whatever. Remember that?
Yeah.
What happened to that money?
Well, we didn't do stocks and bonds.
Well, whatever you did, I mean.
What we ended up doing was our bank, basically, I was going to put it in some T-bills and some other longer maturity investments, but with the interest rates and way it raised, the bank made me a deal where basically gave me the equivalent of a 6-month T-bill rate on the yield. So we have very good, we've had pretty good interest rates. So I never actually, I've got invested maybe $16 million of that money in the T-bills, which comes due in April. But the rest of it's sitting in our deposits at the bank.
So we have access to that cash in April?
It is it's part of our cash pool. So the line item that you see, general fund has, X million dollars of cash. That's where it comes from. Water and sewer has fund cash of X dollars. It's in the cash pool for the city, and that gets invested in short-term thing. Not all of it, but 90% of it is in our deposit account, earning 4% interest.
Yeah. Well, board, I think we're at a time now where we're going to have to make some really tough decisions. I mean, this is coming. I mean, this is going to be disaster, or it's going to be, really bad news. And I'm talking. I mean, my 14 years on the board, that $4.2 million for a water slide is the worst thing I've ever seen. I have nightmares about that sometimes. Anyway, we have property we can sell. The Acme brick, I think that was premature to buy that. And I don't mind using it for the retention ponds, but I think we need to sell the rest. That generate millions of dollars.
We need to break off the frontage and sell that.
The Kia building, the Korea K building, so obviously we're not going to have the money to do that anytime in the near future. We could sell that as $3 million. I think we need to start looking at that. And Director Kim, have you got your list done of the property yet?
No, but I know they're going to work on it and bring it to us to look at what we can sell, what's available, what does it look like, and how do we maintain it.
I think we could do is just to shore up our finances for a while right now and sell some property we don't need or use, and just see what happens. That's all.
Director Neal Martin.
Just the thing we got to consider, and I want to make sure that we're not missing, we're not looking at the big picture without looking at small. Water and sewer is key.
I know.
We need to look at it. I can't sell the Crane Kia building and give me money in water and sewer. That's not how it's going to work. We got to look at water and sewer specifically, and all the things that we can do legally to affect that debt service coverage. That's number one. Then number two, selling property, all those kinds of things. I think those are.
The water slide money could be used for utilities. That could have gone straight to utilities.
The way I understand it is the debt coverage ratio has to be driven by rates. So I can't take. Tell me if I can do this.
Wait a minute.
Can I take general fund dollars and move it over to water and sewer, and that affect my debt service coverage? Okay. So the water slides wouldn't affected the debt service coverage.
They don't affect the rate covenant.
What?
Yeah, they don't affect the debt for the rate purposes.
Right. So if we didn't buy those slides, that doesn't do anything to our 110% ratio that we're trying to hit. Correct?
Right.
No, but that money could have stayed in the general fund and used for utilities, correct? For water leaks, whatever.
For anything.
That's
for
what I'm
city
saying.
purposes.
I think what we're trying to avoid here is getting into a situation where we're having to negotiate, because we're not negotiating from a place of strength. We owe people money. They want their money. They want the debt coverage the way we agreed to. And it's just like with the federal government with the consent decree. They're the federal government. We're always negotiating from a position where they're in a position of strength. So, I think what Director Martin is saying, we don't want to get ourselves into that position, because that's really not a negotiation. It's them coming in and saying, here's how it's done, and there's not much negotiation there. Then that's what we want to avoid, while also avoiding a rate increase. I mean, would that be accurate?
Yes.
Andy, just as a refresher, so as it stands, and we missed the 110% debt ratio coverage for 2024 by, what was the amount? For 23, excuse me.
By 2 percentage points. So it was 108, needed to be 110.
Okay. And we're coming up short, projected to come up a little short for what just the year that just concluded in 2024, but the books are not closed yet.
Not fully closed, but that's what it looks like. Yes.
Similar, 2 percentage points, 1%. Was this one a little closer? I seem to recall.
This one's a little worse.
It's 95%.
95%. This shows 95, but like I said, we're getting to the point where, it's not going to be 95. I'm sure it's going to change, but by how much, I don't know. I don't think it's going to change.
And so
$6-7 million seems like a lot to change.
Is it I would just say that, to administration, finance, the people who are living with this stuff day to day, I got to think that one of your guiding North Stars for this year, 2025, should be making sure that we hit that. And of course, because the 7 of us are part-timers that so much depend upon the information that is given to us to make decisions, please, to the best of your abilities, point us in the direction, let's make sure we're all singing from that hymnal and rowing in that direction, which is, this year, we can't have a third year in a row like that.
Right.
And I do not mean by that statement to imply that that was the intent that anyone was striving for in 2023 or 2024, but just, here early in the year with a heightened awareness of it, sometimes the more you deliberately keep things at the, front burner and on the top of the radar screen, real progress can be made. So that would just be what I would say to you both.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Any further comments? Thank you very much. I'm sure you reviewed the preliminary agenda for the March 4th meeting.
I have a question about the end of our discussion that we just had. We have these items that are these carryover requests that are still pending. Many of them still, frankly, need to happen. And so my request is for an action to place those on the voting meeting for consideration.
Can those be itemized, Jeff?
They certainly can, and frankly, if you want to.
I'd like to know where the money's going to go.
Well, it says here, right here on this list, where the money's going to go.
On what list?
On this one that was in the packet. It's the one that's on your screen. It's in the
okay.
packet.
I got you.
So what do you need?
Well, I was just asking for an action to place that on agenda for consideration.
Okay. Somebody make a motion to put that on the agenda.
I'll make the motion to put it on there.
Second.
Okay, thank you. All right. If there's nothing further, entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you.